In the last episode, Jada shared how growing up as a Jehovah's Witness shaped her choices and led to a painful marriage. In this episode, she reveals how she finally escaped and what it took to break free from an abusive Jehovah's Witness husband and the control that came with it. This is how Jada escaped her abusive Jehovah's Witness marriage.
So how I ended up leaving, his he had all control of our money. Like, he would not allow me to have a bank card, a bank account. I wasn't allowed to have a mail key. But I had to work. I worked full time, so I did make money, but I wasn't allowed to have any access to it. So and also when I came home from work, he would take the distributor cap off the car so that I couldn't go back out and see friends or anything like that. I wasn't allowed to have any friends. Um, so I was a commission salesperson at the time. I sold furniture. And so I talked to the people where I work, actually the security person, and she was absolutely just lovely. And I told her what was happening, and she suggested that I talk to HR, the managers, and see if they could set up a savings account for me so that money would come out of the account every paycheck, but enough that he wouldn't notice it, but enough that I could start stockpiling. And so I ended up doing that. It took me about 6 months to put together like a damage deposit and 1 month's rent and some extra money. And that is what ended up saving me and being able, for me to be able to leave, because he had all of it. Yeah.
That is very, very heart-wrenching to hear that. And I think it's a very brilliant on your part that you were able to reach out to people on your job. And I also feel like being in the workforce is what saved you. When you walked away from this relationship, I'm assuming that you just walked away from all your money as well.
I did. I walked away from everything. And when we've, finally got divorced, I did get a bit of money from the house sale. But other than that, I walked away from it all. I was like, you know what? I don't even want it. Like, I didn't want anything that reminded me of him. And, in hindsight, that's probably a stupid move, because, I'm entitled to half of everything. But I was young, I was only like 26, 25, 26 years old. And I'm just mad, right? I'm done. I'm mad. I didn't want anything from him. Also, and as we know in this religion, in order to leave your husband and get divorced, you have to have an affair, right? And so at that same time, I ended up meeting, actually, my current husband, who we've been married for 28 years. But that's when I met him and had an affair with him in order to be able to get divorced from my first husband, which I think they've changed that rule now. Do you know? Have they?
Here's what I want to make this point very clear to my listening audience. If you realize this is not the truth, why are you having an affair with anybody? You just go live your life like other people, like your neighbors, your coworkers. If there's a person that's not one of Jehovah's Witnesses and they decide that they don't want to be married to their spouse, they just divorce the person and move on. And now they're in their next relationship because the law in the land that you live in does not require you to commit adultery to remarry. So if you're leaving the religion and you're not going to be practicing that religion, you don't care what they call you, because you're going to get disfellowshipped if you marry somebody without a adultery or not. So why are you putting yourself through all the extra step of sleeping with somebody that you might not want to be sleeping with just to give somebody a scriptural divorce?
And I remember thinking that after, like, many years later, I was like, why did I think I had to do that? Why am I still why did I follow that rule? Who gives a crap what they want? And that is also why when I did leave my husband, I did not go to the next judicial committee. I mean, I did go, but I told them, I'm not even talking. I don't want to talk to you. I just want out. Because I thought, and I've even brought this up in my podcast, that if they require you to go to a judicial committee, you don't have to do that. You're not part of that religion anymore. You don't have to follow any rules that they say at all, We're so
Even if you
indoctrinated.
are
Like, I
following,
was young
yeah,
too.
yeah. Even if you are following the rules, you don't have to go to a judicial committee meeting.
No,
You know,
no.
and this is how the indoctrination is so, so pretty. This is the reason why the indoctrination is so bad in this religion, because they come up with these different rules, and they make people feel like they have to
Yeah.
comply. And I had this
Yep.
conversation with this other sister, and what happened to her was she wanted to give her husband that she was leaving the scriptural divorce. And so she actually told the brothers that she had committed adultery when she had not, right? And so that was to give him scriptural divorce, so he could remarry. So if you were to give your husband, the Jehovah's Witness that you were married to, if you went and committed adultery on him, then all you did was gave him the ability to remarry. But
Yeah.
you did not have to do any of the stuff that you did. And I'm glad that
No.
the man that the man that you're married to now, who is your husband of 28 years, that relationship worked out,
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't get that fortunate.
No. No, not at
You know what
all.
I'm saying? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So now, how did you meet your current husband?
Well, I was, where I worked, I was actually the first aid attendant, and I was renewing my level 3 ticket, which is like a 2-week course, in first aid, and that's where I met my husband. He was my partner. Yeah, so
Oh wow! So
we
that was okay.
yeah,
So now, how long were you? You said you were with him for 2 weeks, as a partner, trying to go to this class.
yeah, yeah, and then it ended, and then I kind of, looked for, like, I contacted him after that, and it was a couple of months later that we connected, and I told him the situation, what was going on, and that I was married and it was a horrible relationship and that I was leaving. Um, and because that was a lot for him too, but it ended up working out because we've been married for 28 years. But you're right. It's not something that I would ever do again, as in, think that you'd have to do that to end your relationship. It's just a horrible situation that that organization puts you in, and there's no reason to follow that rule for sure.
Hmm.
It just didn't work out for me.
That's right. Now let me ask you a question. Had your husband, did he know about Jehovah's Witnesses prior to meeting you?
Not really, but his family was all Mormon. So he knew about high control religions. He himself was not Mormon. His parents were not Mormon, but well, I shouldn't say that. His dad had been formerly a Mormon, and both had been raised in it. But as adults, they were excommunicated because they actually were never married, his parents. So they were excommunicated from the church. But my husband's grandpa and his uncle was still Mormons.
Okay. So now you have a Mormon meeting a Jehovah's Witness, and both backgrounds are very high controlled.
Similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like when you guys were trading these stories about your situation, his situation, and how was he being shunned by his family? Because you said his parents left, though, so it's a little different.
Yeah, yeah, so no, there was no shunning on his side. So it was really very hard because for my husband to understand what was happening to me, because my husband's grandfather did not really shun his parents. He decided to accept them rather than, even though he was a bishop in the church. Shunning is a lot more relaxed in the LDS church than it is with the witnesses. It was like he decided that family was more important. The grandfather decided family was way more important than the church. So although he still went and was an active member, he did not actually shun his family. So when he saw what was happening to me, it was really hard for him to accept. And I remember him saying to my mom, he said, my mom kept saying, well, she's made her choice, to be disfellowshipped and be shunned by us. That's her choice. It's not our choice. We're just obeying God. And so he said, well, how old was she when she got baptized? And she said 15. And he said, would you allow her to be married at 15? And she said, well, of course not. And he said, then why are you letting her make a life altering decision at the age of 15 where she could lose everything? And she didn't have an answer for that.
Right. And that's how they do it. I was just having a conversation last night with an individual in the same situation, and she was saying the same thing about how they would allow you to make a decision that you knew nothing about or didn't understand, and how she didn't even understand the teachings. She just knew that she was supposed to be a Jehovah's Witness because her mother was one, you know? So, how did your husband help you to overcome the shunning?
Yeah, so yeah, we ended up moving away. So we I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand being in a small town where I knew everybody, and all of a sudden when you're disfellowshipped, it goes from having this great big community of friends to them basically crossing the street in order to avoid contact with you. And it was too much. I just couldn't deal with it. So we ended up moving away 3 provinces over, and lived there for 5 years. And that, honestly, I think is what saved us, because then we just had to rely on each other. We got married out there, and we really bonded because I didn't have that influence of trying to be recruited back either. Because as we know, in the organization, that's their main number one goal, is to try and get you to be so distraught and so heartbroken that you're going to come crawling back because you miss your family. And I remember my mom saying that. She said, so many, come back to the organization for their family. And I said, well, that's too hypocritical for me, because I don't believe it. I don't believe in this organization anymore. I don't believe in the doctrines. And she says, well, if you just come back for the family, maybe eventually, the love for Jehovah will come back. And I'm like, no, that's not happening. But and sadly, a lot do.
That is so true. How did you pick up the pieces and meet new friends after leaving, moving to this new province, and losing your whole family?
I never had a problem making friends because I always worked outside of the home, right? So I always had a full-time job. I always made friends where I worked. And so the exact same thing happened. We joined a softball team. We had work friends. We joined different clubs. There was so many, there's so many ways to actually meet friends. I know in that organization, you're told that it's a horrible world out there and that you'll be lonely. You don't have to be. You don't have to be at all. There's a lot of opportunities if you seek them out, to make friends. And they're a lot less judgmental than the witness friends. It was because, and I talk about this on my podcast too. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, when the friends that we had within the organization, they had to be snitches, right? We're talking, next level. I remember being at a sleepover one time, and this really good friend of mine happened to tell me that she had, been met a worldly boy and she made out with him. And I acted all cool and, interested in the story. And the next day I just ran and ratted her out, and she got sent to a judicial committee. I mean, it's so bad. And I feel so bad for doing that when I think about it now, because, you know, it, it's not a normal thing to have to do, to be constantly, narking on people. So when you get new friends and you realize that they're not there to do that to you, those aren't this, they're not the same type of friends. It's a way better relationship to have, for sure.
You ain't said nothing but a word, because Jehovah's Witnesses don't give you the right to be human or to explore friendships. And everything is all about, their version of what's right and wrong. And it's really about control. When you were growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, did you ever feel like there was any real love in your family? Because you said your family was close, but did you really see real love that was shown amongst them?
I think, there was definitely more of a genuine love on the side of my parents there. But as for the extended family, It was situation. It was definitely circumstantial, because I have to say, like, my grandfather, one time we were at a convention and I was the only one who never regular pioneered. All my cousins and my sister did. So he lined us all up. He included me, lined us all up outside the convention, and he handed everyone envelopes of money. And he hands them to everyone. He looks at me, he skips me, and he goes to the next kid. And it was all money to help them with their regular pioneering. But because I didn't regular pioneer, I got skipped. However, he made sure that I knew what was happening by lining me up. So, yeah, definitely.
And so
Yeah.
these are the little subtle things that you're seeing, because he's showing you that because you're not pioneering, you don't belong to this group
Yeah.
the way you think you do.
You're not as worthy. Yeah.
How was your relationship with your grandfather after that?
Yeah, we weren't that close after that. But I didn't leave all that long after either, right? It was just a few years, then I was gone.
So do you have any children?
Yes, yes. So my husband and I have been, like I said, married for 28 years. So we have 3 kids who are 21, 19, and 15. Yeah. So, and honestly, I am just so grateful that I'm not raising them in that organization, because I could not imagine it. Like um just the being, like, I've got one child that's in university, and I have one child who is non-binary, and that, when they came out with that, I was like, that's great. There's no question. We don't even need to discuss it if you don't want to. It's nothing requiring a judicial committee. So the freedom to raise children just based on love and not rules and control. um and the way my husband and I raised our children, obviously we disciplined them, but they were raised with a lot of freedom to make their own decisions on whatever they wanted, but knew, that there was consequences if they did make bad choices. But in saying that, the way my children never rebelled against anything, because they had nothing to rebel against. So it's a very different way in bringing up your kids when you don't have religion. And I'm so grateful that we didn't have to do it that way. My kids are very grateful too, because they still see the rest of the family, right? And it not like they still had a bit of a relationship with my mother, who recently passed away, but so they got to see what it was like to be in that organization from a distance, and knew that that was never something they wanted either. Yeah.
You said a lot there, and I agree with what you said, because you got a chance to raise your children with, and you had boundaries, but they weren't like it was when you were growing up. And
Mm-mm.
so, what when you married your husband that you're married to now, at what point did they meet him, your family? Because I'm assuming you were disfellowship.
Mhm.
So, at what point are they meeting your kids, your husband? How's all that playing out?
So, I let my mom um have a bit of a relation like my parents did have a relationship with my children, because I didn't want my kids to ever be like, you never let us see our grandparents, because my parents did that to me. My grandfather, on my dad's side, was disfellowshipped, so I was never allowed to see him or get to know him, and I resented that. And so I didn't want my kids to resent me about not having a relationship with my parents. So I let them choose, right, if they wanted to see them or not. And so they got to know them. They did meet. My parents had introduced them to the rest of the family. However, my husband didn't meet my sister uh, until my dad died 3 years ago. And my mother just recently passed away, and we actually did go to her funeral, and we sat down, and my sister's husband leans over and looks at my husband and says, "Oh, I don't think I've met you yet." Now they've been married for 28 years too. We actually got married 2 months apart. My family, of course, never showed up to my wedding. But yeah, so my sister's husband and my husband just met literally 2 weeks ago for the first
Oh,
time.
that is crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And they live close. Like we only live 45 minutes apart. But yeah.
And what was that like? How did they click? Did they click?
Well, my sister's husband is quite a bit older, like he's in his mid 60s, and my husband is 50. So, there's nothing in common. They have nothing in common. However, we were at a funeral, so everybody was cordial and friendly, and it was fine. But it's not like we're going to hang out with them because that's never going to happen, right?
Right. But you know what? As someone would peer into this conversation, they don't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses. They're finding out that here's two sisters been married 28 years, and neither one of their husbands had met until at the mother's funeral, and
Yeah.
they live not far from each other. That just screams cult, right?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, if they really wanted your husband to be to join this religion, possibly, of course, you wouldn't want that. They didn't even show any type of interest. You know,
No.
what has this experience taught you? So, if you had to go out and teach a class, and somebody wanted you to put together a TED talk or a 60-minute webinar talking about relationships and the way you look at life in terms of looking back in the rear view mirror, what would you say in that speech? Just give me a highlight.
Okay, so if I had to teach a course about relationships or anything, do a TED talk, the first thing that I would say is you gotta learn to love yourself first. And I think when you're in an organization like that, raised as a Jehovah's Witness, you are told to put yourself last. You are to put God first, the organization first. Everything has to come first. You're last. And I know with myself now that it was all about when I learned to self love and love who I was, no matter the flaws that happened, and learn to forgive myself because I had a lot of issues with worthiness. I was felt completely worthless, right? I lost all my family. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I lost all my friends. They just make you feel like you're worthless. And so I had to overcome a lot of that and realize that no, actually, I am incredibly worthy of love. I'm worthy of, the abundance. I'm worthy of kindness. I'm worthy of everything. We all are. Nobody is not worth it, and I realized that I didn't want to judge people because that was another thing that we had to do, even though they claim that they don't, is to judge other people and decide if they were worthy. And I don't do that anymore. I think there's love. If you have love for people, for absolutely everyone, the judgment goes away because you feel empathy and kindness instead of the judgment. So I would say, learning how to be find your compassion for yourself, your worthiness, and self love, and everything else will fall into place. The forgiveness for, if you feel like you need to forgive yourself but leaving a religion like that, I don't think needs forgiveness at all. Um, but having compassion for yourself and self love and everything will fall into place.
That is so true. I really appreciate that. And then, do you have any final comments that you'd like to give? Like, what would you do different, if you had to live your life over again and go through what you went through? What would you do different?
I honestly, I mean, it turned out really good for me. I'm in a very happy relationship and a loving marriage. However, that isn't the norm at all. And if I did have to do that again, I would have just uh, left. I would have, held my head up high and walked out and said, I don't need your religion in order to be happy or to be whole or to be loved. And I would have just set out on my own to discover who I was as a person, because when you are in that organization, you and I mean, this was my perspective and my experience. I felt like we didn't have an identity. I didn't have an identity outside that religion. I had to find one after. I had to figure out who I was. What did I like? What do I enjoy? What type of people do I want to surround myself with? We didn't have that option in that organization. It was all controlled for us. So you come out there and you have this whole new world to discover, of all these new people and all these new things. I would have taken the time to explore that on my own, lived on my own, and just learn to be who I was and create my new identity. And I would really recommend anybody to do that, if you're leaving this religion, is to take some time for yourself. Find out if you're still in a relationship, and that's great. But if you've left a relationship, I would highly recommend that, to go search for your own soul and do some self-reflection work, do self-help, see a therapist, take some courses, learn exactly who you are before, and learn to love yourself before you can go love somebody else at that point.
That is so true. And if people want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
So I have a podcast too called Awaken to Freedom, and it's a similar setup as you have here, platform, where I interview other women who have come out of situations of high control religions or cults or even toxic relationships, and just discuss with them, what they've overcome, how they've overcome it, and how they went on to, live their lives in a better way. And they can read, it's on YouTube, it's also on Spotify, and I do have a website, awakentofreedom.ca. And there we do have people who are therapists and that are religious trauma experience, that can help, that you can seek help for, because I'm not a counselor or a therapist, I'm just someone who has experience. But you can check out the website too, and if they would like to be a guest on my podcast, there's a little form they can fill out to be a guest as well.
Okay, that's excellent. I really appreciate that. And Jada, thank you so much for being on the program, because all the voices that we have out here as one is really helping to shake the foundation of this religion. So, again, thank you so much. And I'll see you all on the next episode.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories and insights right here on Hidden Struggles.